As COVID-19 swept from country to country, governments were forced to lock down their citizens. Businesses have closed, unemployment has skyrocketed, and millions are now quite literally going hungry. The economic meltdown has hit almost every nation, including the richest ones. In just 4 weeks, 22 million Americans filed for unemployment. And that's not the whole story. While the majority in high-paying jobs have been able to work from home so they can be safe, many on the lower end of the pay scale don't have that luxury. Nurses, delivery drivers, and supermarket staff are still on the front lines, facing a greater risk of infection. So while anyone can get COVID-19, regardless of nation, if you're well off, well, you stand a better chance. Why is it hitting the poorest hardest? And what does that say about the way we've organized our societies? Well, let's go to New York and ask Philip Alston. He's the UN Special Rapporteur on extreme poverty and human rights. Good to have you on the program, sir. I think this has exposed inequality for sure, but is it making it worse?
Yes, I don't think there's any doubt that on both counts, it clearly has exposed it pretty dramatically. We see the contrasts. People like myself, I'm well off. I'm able to shelter at home. I have a house with several bedrooms. My family are well. On the other hand, workers, lower income people are in very small areas with perhaps half a dozen people, impossible to really avoid contact, not able to stock up on food, not able to afford anything if they have lost their jobs. In the United States, if there's no job, there's no health insurance for millions of workers. But I think the bigger problem in some ways is the fact that a lot of the dramatic measures that are being taken, we read about all these initiatives with the US Congress devoting $2.2 trillion and another few hundred billion coming perhaps this week. These are also not addressing the poorest in any sustained way. They are looking to protect businesses, which is important, of course, but that's not sustainable, and it's going to further increase inequality.
Yeah, so a lot of people saying that that $2.2 trillion stimulus package is just a Band-Aid and will probably further indebt future generations. In looking for answers and for solutions, I was quite surprised to see the World Economic Forum on their website say quite explicitly universal basic income is the answer to inequalities exposed by COVID-19. They put that up on their website. Kani Wignaraja, the Assistant Secretary General of the UN, and Balazs Horvath, the Chief Economist of UNDP Asia Pacific, were the authors. Is that something that you would endorse?
I think we need to start a little before that. The notion of universal health coverage is extremely important. In the United States, of course, it's well known, but there are many countries around the world where people don't have access to any sort of health care. There's a concept of a social protection floor, which ensures that people who are ill, people who are unemployed, and people who have disabilities and so on are going to get support from the state. I think until we've put those sort of measures in place, a universal basic income is a very nice idea. It helps us to focus on the big problem, but it's simply not affordable in the vast majority of countries.
IMF came out saying that the coronavirus crisis is unprecedented and they've not seen anything like this since the Great Depression. 170 countries will have negative economic growth this year. So, okay, it's exposing economic inequality, it's deepening economic inequality, but in a broader sense, besides the gap between rich and poor, is it also showing how fragile our entire global economic system is, that we're one virus away from everything sort of on the edge, on the precipice?
I think it's clearly shown that already, but the most distressing thing is that we're not looking ahead to the future. If you look at the IMF statement, for example, they make very clear that they believe that once we're over this initial phase, stabilization and so on, then we have to get back to essentially what they call fiscal consolidation, which means austerity. In other words, rather than saying, how can we be spending money now to ensure sustainability for the poor, for the community as a whole, in the next 5, 10 years, they are saying, yes, we need to take emergency measures now, but they're also saying, mind you, this is going to leave us terribly badly off economically in a few years from now, and then it'll be time to cut back. The other thing, of course, is that climate change is nowhere to be seen here.
Right.
Climate change is waiting around the corner, barely. It's going to be every bit as big as COVID-19 in terms of the impact on societies when hundreds of millions of people are going to be forced to move, when working conditions become intolerable because they're too hot, there are fires, there are floods, and we're not using this opportunity where trillions of dollars are being redistributed to factor in what has to be done to anticipate irreversible global warming.
Yeah, and as the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty, and I wonder, with people at home watching this who might have been furloughed, might have been laid off, people who live in low-income neighborhoods, generally live in neighborhoods where they don't have the best healthcare, the best education, the best health and safety infrastructure in general compared to others who are more well off. This is within rich countries, and it's also between countries, right? For those who are watching and asking the question, if this goes on for another 6 months or another year, what kind of world are we going to be living in?
I think the most important thing really is to emphasize that these are political choices. In other words, investments could have been made to make us much better protected from these challenges. They could still be made, but they're not being. And so the world that we're looking at right now in 6 months or 12 months is absolutely grim with very few solutions. People need to be politically motivated and to be insisting that governments do not just continue business as usual, bailing out the rich, bailing out the corporate sector, and doing nothing to transform the society. Now really is the time to address inequality, which has been ignored for so many decades.
Yeah, it's an opportunity to ask some of these very big questions about how we fundamentally, structure and maybe restructure our societies. A little bit closer to home and maybe something that's a bit of housekeeping for now. I'm curious to know your thoughts on what the US president is pushing for and others who are saying we need to open up our societies very quickly. We need to open up our economies quickly and get people back to work because the situation in terms of health, in terms of disease, in terms of social strife will be far worse than that caused by COVID-19 unless we do it quickly. Your thoughts on that?
I think if there was genuine concern with avoiding a worse social situation in the months and years ahead, they would be looking at the sort of programs that I've been talking about. The idea of getting people back to work prematurely is in some ways what I would call a social Darwinist idea. You can be sure that the White House is not going to be relaxing its lockdown. But what it's saying is that the average worker should indeed get out there, take the risk, be brave, don't worry so much about this, you'll be okay. They're the ones who are going to die. They're the ones who are going to suffer the brunt of it. And it's the corporate leaders, it's the political leaders who will ensure that they themselves remain fully protected. So this has got to be a scientific decision and not simply a political decision which sacrifices the working classes, who are always the ones who are considered to be essential workers. It's the women, it's the minorities and others who are really essential because they're what keeps the economy going. And that's who the president and other such leaders are trying to send back out onto the streets before they are safe.
The UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty, Philip Alston. Great to have you on the program. I thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.